right, welcome everyone to our Retirement Ready Talks. I'm Tony Drake with Drake and Associates, and really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. We'll try to keep this brief, but wanted to talk a little bit about how to take back control. We're in this volatile economy. Lots of talk about rising inflation, new administration in Washington that could mean some rising taxation. Those are two of the biggest risks to your retirement nest egg. So we want to walk you through some ideas on how you can protect yourself from that. For those of you who aren't able to stick around for the entire presentation, again, we're going to keep it brief. If you'd like some additional help, if you're watching us on Facebook, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a Book Now button. You can set up a complimentary consultation where we can answer any questions you have, or you can always visit us at wealthwisconsin.com. So let's jump right in. A couple disclosures for you. I know that's probably hard to read, but we're going to talk a little bit about taxes and investments. Important to understand, I am not an accountant or a CPA. You don't want to make any changes without talking to those appropriate professionals. And you don't want to make changes to your portfolio without really sitting down. And your retirement and income plan should really be unique and based on what you and your family are trying to accomplish in retirement. So let's start with our first question, kind of where are we with all this coronavirus business and how did we get here? What we saw was, if we think back to March of 2020, we saw some pretty rapid drops, right? We had a 13% drop in the market, and in a very short time period, 22 days, the market lost 30%. Now that's the fastest loss we've seen since the Great Depression. Right? If we compare it to the Great Depression, it lost 30% even faster. But what's important to realize is investing is not a place for emotions and for panicking, right? Imagine maybe some of you listening tonight got a little bit afraid last March and April and you sold out. What happened? Well, you missed one of the largest, the quickest run-ups in history, right? So it's important to have a long-term plan. It's important to address risk and volatility, and it's important to address rising inflation right now and rising taxation and what that might mean for you. So a couple quick questions. Where could we go from here? I think we'll continue to see some volatility, right? Today we saw massive drops in the markets, right? There was a rising inflation that's really beating up the technology companies and really causing some volatility in the market. And I think we're going to continue to see that. Right? And we saw lots of federal stimulus packages starting back in March. The government reacted very quickly, spending trillions of dollars. Look at these numbers. First stimulus act, the CARES Act, $2.2 trillion. The second one, the American Rescue Plan Act, was another $1.9 trillion. Now, those last two, remember, are just proposed. They haven't passed yet, but the Biden administration is proposing an infrastructure plan for another $2 trillion and the American Families Plan for another $1.9 trillion. That's nearly $8 trillion in expenses. And whether you fall on the left or right, not a political conversation tonight, but remember that we have to pay for this somehow. Right? And if we look at if you look at any of the independent groups that have analyzed Biden's proposed tax increases, although we're spending $7.9 trillion, we're only bringing in about $3.5 trillion. So there's still a pretty major shortfall. And one of the things that we look to measure that shortfall is what's called a debt to GDP ratio. So look at this change here. This was the debt to GDP ratio. So think of GDP essentially as the amount our government, our country can make as income. And debt is simply the money that we spent. So you can see the debt to GDP ratio was a little over 100% in quarter one of 2020. And then we had a massive step up in just one quarter. By the second quarter of 2020, huge increases. And we don't have the official numbers from the first quarter for 2021 yet. But we had two more stimulus packages during that 3-month period. So you can imagine that this bar is going to grow out here even more, right? And whether we look at Stephen Mnuchin or Janet Yellen would say the same thing, right? They tell us in different times we'll fix the deficit. Don't worry. Don't look at what's going on here. Now is not the time to worry about it. And maybe they're right. Maybe we needed to do some stimulus spending. But we primarily work with folks that are in retirement or nearing retirement. And the reality for my retirees is they're on fixed incomes, right? We don't have income from work anymore. So what happens to my retirees when the government decides it is time to deal with the deficit? And that's the type of thing that we have to plan for, right? Because taxes, simple economic way to deal with this deficit is rising taxes and rising inflation, right? And if you're tuning in tonight, hopefully I don't get you in a bad mood here. Maybe you're feeling like this young man.
6. Oh my gosh.
Where's all your money gone, Donnie?
Taxes. 9, 10, 11. Let me fix my houses.
Bug, it's okay. It's part of the game.
No, it's not.
It
It's
is.
not fun.
It's not fun to what?
Payments for 2020, and I feel a little bit like Donnie. You know, I'm in tears that I have to pay so much in taxes, but that's kind of the reality. But I think the important part when we talk about volatility, I know there's a lot of numbers on this screen, and I don't want you to get too concerned with the specifics. But what we're looking at here is a very long term. We're looking at 1980 through 2000, and we're looking at the high points. The blue line is where the market closed for that year. The red negative dot is what we call intra-year decline, so how much it was down. So you'll notice some years market was down 28% at one point, but closed up 23. So volatility is actually normal, but I think for folks in retirement, it can get very, very scary. And that's why it's so important to have that long-term plan, right? This is another great graph that shows this. We're looking at a 20-year period in the market here. And let's imagine you just ignored all the noise in the market, ignored all the talking heads, and you just stayed fully invested. If you were in the S&P, you averaged about a 6% rate of return. Well, let's say some days you got nervous, maybe your political party didn't win, so you said, boy, I'm getting out of the market, this country is doomed. Or maybe coronavirus happened and you decide to pull your money out and you just missed the 10 best days in that 20-year period. Now your return more than cuts in half. If you miss the best 20 days, you're down to about break even, and you see where this story's going. The more and more good days you miss, it pulls us into negative territory. So again, it's really important to have that long-term plan, right? Because we're living longer. Volatility is real. But we have to think about, number one question I get in my office by far is, Tony, do I have enough money? Am I going to be okay? Right? And it's important to think about because we are living longer, right? Males age 65, half of us will live to 89. 1 out of 4 of us will live to 94. Well, what about women, right? Half of the women will live to age 90. 1 out of 4 of the women will live to 96. We know women live longer than us men. And then, you know, if you're married, you may or may not know this, but couples, half of the couples will live to 94. 1 out of 4 of you live to 98. So maybe you're sitting at home and thinking, boy, during this whole quarantine, we've been spending too much time together, and you're thinking about throwing in a towel. That might be a reason you want to stick it out. When I think about longevity, I can't help but think of my Grandma Mary and my Grandpa Sam, 2 of my heroes. Grandpa was a World War II Navy vet, and Grandma was just a brilliant, loving, amazing human being, and they were married quite a long time at the end, and Grandma used to say, boy, those first 50 years were tough. But after that, I got used to Grandpa Sam, and it's been easy from then on out. So if you're getting close to 50 years, according to my late great Grandma Mary, hang in there, it's about to get easier. So let's look at the impact of down markets, because we know losses can hurt us in retirement, right? So let's look at a data set here. Let's assume that we have 2 couples that have $1 million portfolio. Don't get hung up on the number. It's just an easy number to do math on. And let's assume their Social Security is not enough. Maybe they have a pension, maybe they don't. But they need to withdraw $50,000 a year to supplement their income. Nothing wrong with that. That's why you saved up in the first place, right? And let's assume a 3% inflationary environment. I'm going to encourage everybody, the last 10 years, inflation's been about 1.8%. I want to encourage you to use the 30-year number. If you watch the financial news at all you've heard about lately is rising interest rates and inflationary pressures, right? When we have this type of spending, we may see this rising inflation, so we have to account for that. Milk, eggs, gas, things cost more over time, right? So going back to my example here, let's assume we have these 2 couples. Couple A walks into a financial advisor's office. They get a good handshake. Well, I guess you're getting an elbow bump nowadays, but you get an elbow bump, a nice cup of coffee. Maybe you get that brewer's magnet for the fridge, and the advisor says, my average rate of return is 6.25%. And you say, well, boy, that's double inflation. We're pretty conservative investors. sign us up, right? Unfortunately for this couple, they lose 10% year one, they lose 5% year two, they break even year three, and then for the next 27 years, they make 7.5%. Now, if you pull out your calculators and plug in all those numbers, that's a 30-year average rate of return of 6.25%, right? And now couple B has a little bit different experience. That reminds me, I went to high school at Pius in Wauwatosa, and I'm sitting in algebra class freshman year, and I'm getting ready for my first test, and I love math, so I was prepared, I was ready to do well, and I pulled out my calculator. And sister walked by, cracked me on the hand, and she said, "You can't use a calculator, Tony." I said, "Why can't I use a calculator?" She said, "What do you think, you're going to have one in your pocket your whole life?" I should go back and show her and say, "As a matter of fact, I do now, right on my phone," right? She was actually a great teacher, but no calculators in her class. Couple B has a similar story, right? They have that same $1 million. They need to take $50,000 out a year, 3% inflationary environment. They get that same handshake, cup of coffee, brewer's magnet for the fridge, and the advisor says, "My portfolio averages 6.25%. They say, "Great, sign us up." Little different story though. For 7.5 years, they make 27%. Then they lose the 10, the 5, and the 0. We're going to see this causes a much different effect on a portfolio. Now, before we move forward, I do want to make the point quickly that, look, none of us, my guess is if I said, "Hey, after we're done with the talk tonight, jump in your cars, drive over to my office. We have all the paperwork prepared, and we can transfer over all your accounts. Year one, I'm going to lose you 10%. Year two, I'm going to lose you 5%. And the next year, we're simply going to break even." My guess is I'd be pretty lonely here at the office tonight. Nobody would show up. But I want to make the argument that although none of us want to lose 10, 5, and 0, I think that's actually a pretty conservative correctionary period, isn't it? If we think back to 2000, 2001, 2002, we had 3 years of double-digit losses, 16-month period surrounding 2008 where we lost 52% in the markets, right? What we had last year, although we lost 30%, we were recovered before the end of the year. That's not normal. That was a near miss. Generally, these recovery periods on average take 2 to 3 years. So it's important to understand, although none of us want to lose 10, 5, and 0, that's probably a pretty conservative correctionary period. But much different outcome, right? The couple that lost money early in retirement, they're out of money in 21 years. Living on Social Security, hopefully they had a pension, right? Couple B, nearly a decade later, has almost $800,000 left, right? With the exact same average rate of return. So it wasn't about the average rate of return, it was about when we lost. So that's why it's so important to have the right risk in your portfolio, because we don't know when those losses are coming, right? Let me introduce you to my buddy Warren Buffett. He's not really my buddy. Can you imagine, though, having dinner with Warren Buffett would be pretty interesting, pretty successful individual. Say he's worth over $74 billion, pretty phenomenal number. He has 2 rules. Warren Buffett's rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, of course, don't forget rule number 1, right? Really important. And when I think back to March last year, when the market was down, we were talking to most of our clients once a week. And you know, not because we were panicked, frankly, and most of them weren't panicked. But I think it was a great time to just get a pulse and understand what they were thinking about, what they were fearing, and let them know what we were doing to protect the portfolios that we had tested for this. It was also an incredible opportunity to do Roth conversions, right? Imagine your IRA, your retirement account was down 20 or 30%. If you did a Roth conversion, and some of you probably did this with your advisors, if you did a Roth conversion, you paid a tax bill on a smaller account, and then it rebounds income tax free. Pretty phenomenal opportunity. But when we were reaching out, people were saying, "Boy, Tony, my sister, brother, neighbors, they're not hearing from their advisors." And I think frequent communication is really important, especially in those volatile times. So action item number 1 tonight is I want to encourage you to take us up on a complimentary offer. We're going to do a risk analysis for you. Again, you can set that up simply by clicking on Facebook, that Book Now button in the upper right, or you can visit us at wealthwisconsin.com and click on Schedule a Phone Call, and we can get this started. We're going to ask you a series of questions, It assigns you a risk score of 1 to 99. Think 1 being I want everything in the bank. I don't care if I don't make any money. 99 is actually more risky than the market itself. So think of this as emotional risk. How much risk are we emotionally comfortable taking, right? Then we're going to analyze your current portfolio, right? And here's a situation we see all too often. This couple said they were comfortable at a 32, but they were invested at a 71, which begs the question, why are you taking double the risk that you're emotionally comfortable taking? The answer I get 9 times out of 10 is people say either, Tony, I had no idea, right? I just had no clue how much risk we were taking. Or they tell me, Tony, if I told my advisor once, I've told him or her 100 times, I did not want a high risk portfolio, right? So it's just data. Doesn't mean anything's on fire. We don't need to panic. It's just data so we can make educated decisions. Then we could do some neat stuff called stress testing so we can say, okay, if you're invested at a 71 in 2013 when the market went up 32%, you're going to make 29. But in 2008 when the market dropped 38%, we'll lose about 35. Or in the 16 months surrounding 2008 when the market cut in half, we'd lose 48. So again, this doesn't mean anything's on fire. It's just data. I will share most of my retired clients say they're not comfortable losing 35 or 50% at this stage in life, but maybe you are. Maybe you're a high risk investor. It's just simply data so you can understand what's going on. Another couple quotes from my buddy Warren Buffett. He says, you never know who's swimming naked till the tide goes out. Maybe last March your portfolio lost a lot quicker than you thought it could. That might be an indication that you were swimming naked, right? And you were a little overexposed. Now is a great time to rebalance the portfolio because you're rebalancing at the top. We're not selling at the bottom. So it can be a wonderful time to fix that. Last quote from Warren Buffett. He says, it's insane to risk what you have for something you don't need. That's a pretty good one. Insane to risk what you have for something you don't need. And think about that because it's pretty poignant, I think. Imagine, I don't know the drama with the Packers, if Aaron Rodgers is coming back or not. I have a son, he'll be 14 in a couple weeks, and he's just a sports nut. But imagine our Aaron Rodgers takes us all the way to the Super Bowl next year. And we're sitting in the fourth quarter, there's 5 seconds left on the clock, we're already up by a touchdown, and we're on the opponent's 7-yard line. Can you imagine a situation where Aaron Rodgers takes that snap, takes his step back, and tries to go up by 2 touchdowns? Of course not, right? The risk would be crazy. He's already won the game. Well, I can't tell you how many retirees I've met over the years that have already won the retirement income game, yet they're taking risk where they could lose 30, 40, 50%, and that could really put their retirement at risk. So it's just important to understand your numbers and understand what you're doing. One of the tax strategies we like to think about is really aligning our risk and our tax strategies. So oftentimes we think about risk in 3 different buckets, right? You may think of this as short term, kind of mid-term, and then long term, the money I don't need or won't touch. We call this red money, right? That's our money at risk in the market. We can make 30%. We could lose 30%. You know, we'd like to see, depending on the risk you're comfortable with, 6 to 9% average rates of return. So how much do you want at risk, right? And it's a simple question. This is mutual funds, stocks, bonds, you know, things that go up, ETFs, things that go up and down with the market, right? And then we have our safe assets. We call this our yellow money, right? This is banks, CDs, right? Problem with our safe money, we never see the minus sign of the parentheses that mean loss, but it's just not making much, right? Pretty close to 0% interest. But we still need to have some cash on hand. And then oftentimes there's some hybrid products that take some features of both. We call this our green bucket, where it has the guarantee that we can't lose, right? So we'll never see the minus sign in the parentheses that mean loss, but we accept a more conservative upside, 3 to 5% per year, right? So we have some guarantees it won't lose, but a little bit better upside than having too much cash sitting at the bank. So this can be a nice alternative, but one of the things we want to think about is aligning our risk with our tax buckets. There's really 3 types of tax buckets. One is income, right? This is sometimes called ordinary income. This is pensions, wages from work, right? Generally the higher income brackets. Next one is capital gains. This can be long term or short term. As long as you hold it for a year, most of us are paying 15%. And then there's this one, tax free, right? This is our Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks. Say it at home with me, tax free. It just has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? When I can't fall asleep at night, I just recite that to myself. But we really want to align our risk with these buckets. We had a couple that came in a few months ago. We simply realigned where they were taking their risk in which tax bucket, and it added a number of years to the longevity of their portfolio. Generally speaking, we want our safe assets here. Why? This is taxed at the highest rate. So let's put our conservative portfolio there that's not going to grow as much, right? Let's put our midterm portfolio here because it's a little bit more preferred rate. And let's put our long-term assets, our higher risk assets, in a tax-free bucket because we should have more growth over the years and it grows income tax-free. Pretty simple concept, right? But we need to think about it. We really need to think through. A couple things I want to share with you. I'm growing very concerned about the bond market, right? As those interest rates go up, the bond prices are going to go down. And here's two of our thought leaders in kind of the economic world and the investment world. We talked about Warren Buffett recently. He just had his annual shareholders meeting for his Berkshire Hathaway shares. And he mentioned that bonds face a bleak future. They're not the place to be these days, he wrote in his letter to his shareholders. And here's Ray Dalio. He started and owns the largest hedge fund really in the world, billions and billions of dollars. And he says, I believe cash is and will continue to be trash because it has returns that are significantly negative relative to inflation. He says you should borrow cash rather than hold it as an asset and buy higher returning non-debt assets. So many of you may be thinking when we talk about this, different risk buckets, you may be thinking, that's great, Tony, but I have 40 or 50 or 60% of my portfolio in bonds. Well, you may be facing some losses in that portion of your portfolio. So finding some alternatives, some alternative safe assets that can really offset that makes a big, big difference. I went through a process a couple of years ago. I built a house. This isn't my house, but I walked up one day and I saw something like this, a foundation, and I don't know about you guys, but it wasn't the most exciting part of the process, right? But arguably the most important, because if this isn't done right, doesn't matter what pretty countertops or cabinets or flooring I pick, if the foundation starts to crack, I'm in trouble. Well, the equivalent in retirement to your house foundation is income. What most people are asking me when they say, Tony, do I have enough money? Am I going to be okay? They're really asking me, am I going to have the income I need to survive everything I have to hurdle in retirement, right? And that's really important. So let me ask you a question tonight. Obviously, I can't see your responses, but maybe consider this for yourself. How many of you have a written retirement and income plan? Now, here's the caveat that you understand. A written retirement and income plan that you understand. Now, if you're sitting at home and thinking, boy, I don't know that I have that, you're actually in the majority. Most groups that I ask that question, I only get a couple hands that go up. So if you feel like you don't have that, you're in the majority. I don't want you to feel bad. And I'm not, if you're thinking about that large stack of papers you get once a year, that's not what I mean. I mean a written retirement and income. Or maybe you're thinking about that once a year meeting you have with your advisor. And what do? I call it the bobblehead. You just nod, right? Because he or she says a bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense to you anyway, right? We call ours the Retirement Ready Roadmap. And I found over the many years I've been working with retirees, I found a couple common denominators. People want to have comfort, confidence, and control in their plan. And there's really a couple areas we need to address. Investments are important, and this is where a lot of advisors will start and end. And I'm not meaning to discredit it. I just think it's part of an overall plan. It's not the plan. We also have to address income. Where's my income going to come from? From what accounts and what orders? Am I taking advantage of the best tax strategies that I can? Really important concepts to think about. Healthcare is a big one. Healthcare is expensive in retirement. Whether we're worried about long-term care issues, and by the way, long-term care insurance is not the only way to solve that problem, but whether we're thinking about long-term care issues, or maybe that big decision when you turn 65, do I take Medicare Supplement, Medicare Advantage, right? Those are difficult decisions to walk through. This is one of the reasons we've created this one-stop shop feel at our firm, where if you have tax questions, we have accountants and we do tax returns for our clients. If you have health insurance issues, we have an independent health insurance agent that can help you walk through that and find the best plan for you, right? We have an elder law attorney, so if you need wills or trusts or powers of attorney things done, we can do that right here. You don't have one hand pointing at the other and everyone blaming it. We can get all the professionals in the room together to work on your plan. And most of the families that I meet with, the couples, one of the two tends to deal with the finances. And they're always telling me, Tony, if I pass, it's terrible stuff to think about, but they say if I pass first, I'm really concerned about my spouse, right? And I'm really concerned when the second one of us passes, we don't want the IRS to be the largest beneficiary. Tax strategies are so important. I know it's not necessarily the topic of tonight, but you can watch some of our old videos or watch for some upcoming classes and we'll talk about tax strategies. But these can make a phenomenal difference and your plan has to work together, right? Tax codes change, right? Laws change. Maybe just your dreams of what you want to see in retirement changes. And one thing's for sure, in retirement, you don't want to be this guy. You don't want to be a crash test dummy. You want to get it right, and you want to make sure you get that retirement plan right, because there are no redos. There's no undo button when it comes to retirement, right? So our final action item tonight is to get a complimentary written retirement and income plan. We do need you to have a $250,000 minimum. If you think about all the pieces that we're putting together, that's just really the point where it makes sense for a comprehensive plan. And again, if you want to start that process, it's completely complimentary. If you're watching us on Facebook, in the upper right-hand corner, you can click that Book Now button. Our calendar will pop up and you can schedule an appointment. Or you'll see the website at the bottom of the screen, wealthwisconsin.com. You can visit us there, click on the Schedule Your Consultation button, and that'll get you going as well right away. Here's our beautiful advisors, our team of advisors. We got a new gentleman, Sam, starting here next week, and we are eager and willing to answer your questions. So my hope tonight is that you learn something. We talk about being an education first firm, whether you listen to us on the radio on AM 620, maybe you saw our new TV show on ABC. We talk about being an education first firm. My goal is that you walk away having learned something. So I hope I met that goal tonight. I know everyone's busy. I do truly appreciate your time and thank you for joining us. Have a great night and we'll talk to you all soon.